I figured out the connective tissue between the past 3 games in the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise and the rest of the timeline. And taking it one step further, I think it could tell us more about the upcoming games in the series. That's a huge claim, I understand, but it's not without its merit. Because similar to what the title says, unless I've changed it in fear of some algorithmic nonsense, FNAF's first sin is finally meeting its reckoning. So what do I mean by this? Well, slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. A big theme of this theory has to do with penance, the idea of paying for something that you've done. And I think the poster child for that of this series is Michael Afton. We all know the story of Michael Afton. At least it stays relatively the same in most FNAF theories. He bullies and torments his younger brother, the crying child, or Dave, until eventually causing his untimely death. And then pretty much for the rest of his life, he's working to atone for that mistake. And the universe kicks his ass because of it. The specifics tend to get a little iffy here depending on what theory you believe. But for the most part, Michael Afton time and time again struggles and suffers to make up for those mistakes, and Fazbear punishes him for it. I believe that Michael Afton worked at the FNAF 2 and 1 locations under the direction of his father, William Afton. William wanted to get closer to those restaurants without arousing suspicion. But to be fair, even if you disagree with that, which is fair to do, it's pretty much confirmed that Michael Afton goes down to the sister location bunker and gets his insides literally scooped out by a giant metal claw so robots can wear his skin to escape, and then somehow he still doesn't die. Then after that, looking for his father and continuing to try to make up for the mistakes of the past, he eventually ends up at Fazbear's Fright and encounters his dead father in a robot suit one-on-one and burns the place down to try to settle things, and of course that doesn't work. So one final time he shows up at the FNAF 6 location, encounters all of the ghosts of his past again, and chooses to die in a fire with the rest of them. No matter what you believe, Michael Afton has been through the ringer, but as horrible as his life has been up to this point, he's not the only one suffering in this franchise. Far from it. There are plenty of other adult characters going through terrible things in this franchise, and I think with some of the recent ones there's been a link. Damn, Mark, that was fast.
Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be making our very own rye toast. First, we start with 2 cups of flours. I like to use almond and coconut flour to keep things healthier, and then add 4 tablespoons of lore spice to make him nice and confused. Can't forget our theory powder and our theory soda. And then mix our dry ingredients until combined. Once that's all done, we can start adding our wet ingredients into the mixer. First, a can of pumpkin puree. Then 4 eggs because look at him. Then we add a little bit of honey and add hyperactivity to the mix. Some meta oil and gamer extract. You do not want to know where that came from. Now we mix our wet ingredients until mostly combined, adding our dry ingredients and continuing to mix until a dough forms. Remember to spray your bread pans and cover with tin foil. Now just put it in the oven at 666 degrees for 5 hours and voila, your very own toast.
But who has time to do all that? Instead, you at home right now can skip all of those steps and order your very own toast plushie on makeshift.com. Link in the description, displayed on the screen, and in the card. All you have to do is click and order it. These are only going to be available for a limited time, so make sure you get yours while you can. It's a great plushie and it's got 2 sides. You only have a few weeks left, so make sure to get one while you can. Cassie is the protagonist of Five Nights at Freddy's Ruin, the free DLC add-on for Security Breach, and her father is of prominent importance throughout the entire chapter. She mentions her father several times, notes that he owns a Faz wrench, which implies that either he worked at the Pizzaplex or just stole one, I guess. And several item descriptions in her inventory tell us more about him, that he was a lifelong fan of Fazbear's and collected all the merchandise, and was a huge fan of Bonnie, Bonnie being his favorite. So what do we get from this? Well, the very next game in the series was Help Wanted 2, in which we play as an employee from the Pizzaplex trying to stop the glitch trap virus from taking over the entire pizzeria. I think most people pretty much immediately agreed that we're playing as Cassie's dad. It just made the most sense. And I still think that's true. But why does that matter? Well, Cassie's dad is going through one of the worst fates in most recent games. Similarly to Michael, he's struggling against animatronics that are more and more so trying to kill him, and no matter what you do in this game, no matter what options you pick, you die, or at best, you die. In one of the endings, he's trapped alive in a digital consciousness forever, essentially, by Vanny. And worst case scenario, he's ripped apart by several staff bots, and maybe his consciousness gets put into a mask bot so he can watch his daughter march into the very same fate that he just suffered. Or hopefully for his sake, that was just artistic liberty to show you what happened next. It's really hard to tell. No matter what happens, Cassie's dad does not make it out of Help Wanted 2 alive. But so what? I get it. Bad things happen to people in this franchise all the time. Why is Cassie's dad so important? Well, like I mentioned, there seems to be a linking thread between him and Michael Afton. Both of them seem to be fond of Freddy Fazbear masks. At the end of the Help Wanted 2 Princess Quest ending, if you input the correct code into the tombstones, you're greeted by this secret, a chest containing a Bonnie mask, to which our character says it seems familiar. I'm not the first to suggest this, but I think Cassie's dad is the Bonnie bully. After all, several animatronics ask, what makes you so special? And having this deep of a tie to Fazbear's definitely would qualify him. We know from Ruin that Cassie's dad was a lifelong Freddy's fan, and Bonnie was his favorite. For additional evidence, Game Theory pointed out that the color scheme of Cassie and the Bonnie bully are very similar, which is likely not an accident. All of this, I think, really points Cassie's dad into being the Bonnie bully from all those years ago. Now, I hear some of you, the timeline is a little at odds here, but if he was a teenager somewhere in the early 80s and has an 8 to 10-year-old, I really don't know how old Cassie is, my guess is like 11, I don't know. But if she's around 10 to 12 years old in Security Breach, which takes place in anywhere from 2030 to 2040, then I would argue that he could be anywhere from 55 to 78. And sure, having a kid in your 70s isn't super common or possible for many people. But if he's closer to 55, 60, then he would have had a kid in his 40s, which I would argue is completely normal and average. So since the timeline is a little flux here, I think this is completely logical. But I hear you, why does this matter? Well, twice now we have the possibility of one of the FNAF 4 bullies meeting an untimely demise because of the Fazbear's brand. I think each FNAF 4 bully is going to or has already met an untimely end thanks to the Freddy Fazbear's Entertainment franchise. And no, not by William Afton. I know when you hear me say this statement, it's easy to assume that I'm going to argue that William is seeking revenge on those horrible teenagers who killed his son. But frankly, I don't think that makes any sense. For one, if William Afton wanted to kill 4 teenagers, he would have done it back in the 80s when it happened. And to be super honest with you, I don't think William cares about his kids at all. To me, William Afton as a character only cares about people so far as he can use and manipulate them. At best, I think William Afton would see the death of one of his children as an inconvenience, not a tragedy. So no, I don't think William is behind the deaths of all of these bullies. So then, who is targeting the FNAF 4 bullies? Well, that's where we get into the spirituality of the FNAF franchise. Scott Cawthon, as a writer, seems to be very interested in the concept of karma. He may never name it specifically, but like 80% of the short stories are somebody doing something bad and then getting punished for it. Bad people pay the price in this franchise, and the horror of it comes from the fact that the price they're paying is usually way more than they deserve. In Scott's works, the universe seems to almost be its own character, and a very vindictive one at that. You bullied your brother a lot? Well, now unfortunately you swallowed some sea bonnies and your entire body is going to be made out of microorganisms by the end of the week. So on and so forth. Now, this isn't an always thing. A lot of the Tales in the Pizzaplex stories frankly just see horrible things happen to completely normal teenagers. But a lot of the time in this franchise, bad people get punished, and that's the point. It's almost like there's a weird messed up moral in the middle of this horror story. And I think the games franchise is really doubling down on this idea in recent years. Michael Afton, as we all know, has gone through hell in this franchise. But now the newest character we got introduced to, Cassie's dad, is doing the same thing. He has evidence of being one of the FNAF 4 bullies that killed Dave Afton, and he's going through something horrible at the Freddy's franchise. But that's just 2, and frankly, one of them isn't even recent, so it's not really a pattern. Or is it? To add some more support to this theory, the same thing happened just a few months ago in the most recent FNAF game. Into the Pit is a retelling of the first Fazbear Fright story of the same title, in which we see Oswald travel through the memory of the missing child incident victims to save them and eventually find his father, all of them being trapped by an evil manifestation of the agony caused by William Afton's murders. It's a whole lot, but Oswald goes through hell facing unknowable monsters just trying to save his family and the victims along the way. But I hear you, Oswald is much too young to be one of the FNAF 4 bullies. He's like 10 and hasn't even heard of Freddy's until the beginning of this game. But his father isn't. Oswald's father suffers. Maybe not as much as Michael Afton or Cassie's dad, but at the beginning of the game, Oswald's father gets knocked out and kidnapped by that very same evil manifestation of the agony caused by William Afton's murders. And then to top it off, he's unconscious for like a week at the bottom of a ball pit at best, and his mind is trapped in this weird hellscape where he might even be getting tortured for all we know. Not to mention, he's barely saved by Oswald in some of the endings. In other endings, he's saved by Oswald, begins to gain consciousness again, only for his first thing he sees to be his own son kidnapped by that very same monster, disappear into a pit, and likely never figure out how to save him. This is a horrible week, made worse by some of these endings. But all of this suffering has a point, because what can Oswald find in his family's attic? An old Freddy's mask, one specifically pointed out as retro. We know from the Into the Pit story that Oswald's father went to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza when it was still in operation, and he knows about the missing child incident, so this mask was likely his. And if Oswald's dad was going to a Freddy's location 2 years after the big bite, it's not a huge stretch to assume he would have been going to Freddy's locations during the bite. Not to mention, age-wise, he lines up perfectly if this story takes place somewhere in the late 90s to early 2000s, which, judging by this cell phone, seems to be accurate. So now, twice in a row, we have an adult character who is a fan or has been a fan of the Freddy's franchise, who owns an old Freddy's mask, going through a horrible situation. And not for nothing, but Into the Pit specifically points out Michael's Foxy mask as an Easter egg. So what is all this leading to then? Well, there's one blank spot left, the Chica bully. Not to mention the incredible likelihood that Megacat Studios is already working on the Fetch game. And according to the Steel Wool interview, they work on multiple projects at once, so I'm sure Steel Wool is working on the next FNAF game that'll come out after Secret of the Mimic. Now, we know nearly nothing about any of these games, even the one that's already been announced being Secret of the Mimic, but I feel like I can almost guarantee you that one of these games is going to feature an old Chica mask as a collectible. And if it does, and that mask is associated with an adult character in any of these games, I think this theory is as good as confirmed. Scott is once again showcasing the karmic nature of the universe, making the FNAF 4 bullies who, to be fair, started a lot of the FNAF franchise by leading to the death of Dave Afton, find their true comeuppance much later in life by the very same franchise that they killed a child in. Is it more than they deserve? Almost certainly, but that's kind of a recurring theme for this franchise, and that's where the horror comes in. At least that's my thoughts on this. Am I looking way too much into this? Probably, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it below. As a reminder, you have 2 weeks left to get this plushie, so get it while you can. It's got 2 sides. Oh, and if you want something else to watch, last week I made a video going over the biggest leak in Pokemon history, at least some of it, on the second channel, which you can find right here. If you want your fan art featured on the channel, make sure to share with #ToastArt. A huge thank you to the best channel members, the Dough Risers, and until next time, as always, stay toasty, slices.